Hello and welcome. It's easy enough to wage war, but is it possible to wage peace? Once fighting starts, it becomes a cycle of mistrust and hate that can last decades, even centuries. So what's the starting point for making peace? Across the globe, dozens of ongoing conflicts continue to rage, resulting in the loss of thousands of lives each year. While most of the world is aware of the wars in places such as Iraq and Afghanistan, smaller conflicts like those in Sri Lanka, Nepal and the Philippines get little attention and even less hope for resolution. For the battles dragging on in places such as the Middle East and Kashmir, there's even less light at the end of the tunnel. So today we ask, does security have to come before talks of peace begin? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an email or an SMS, and we also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining us for the discussion today is a man described as the father of peace studies, Johan Galtung. As well as founding the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, Professor Galtung has held chairs in peace studies and peace research at universities in 3 continents. He's just published 50 Years, 100 Peace and Conflict Perspectives. He's joining me here in Washington, D.C. And from New York is a veteran of the United Nations, Alvaro de Soto. He's been a leading figure in peace negotiations, such as the successful resolution of El Salvador's 10-year civil war. Gentlemen, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Professor, starting with you. Thank you, Ambassador. Now, Professor, considering how most conflicts end up, isn't peace really a relative term? Isn't it a situation where it's more or less just an end to the violence the way people see it now?
Well, it is a relative term like health. You're not going to get perfect health for everybody in the world. But we have the last 2 centuries done much better than we did before. So the question is whether we couldn't do the same for peace. And to me, the general formula in one sentence is identify the underlying conflict and try to solve it. In other words, searching for peace comes before security. You can do this before the violence starts, you can do it during the violence. It's very important.
Interesting, Professor. We had a question from a viewer who touched on your teachings on negative and positive peace. And David Touch wrote in saying, what is the distinction between negative peace and positive peace? And apart from explaining it, give us an honest assessment of how applicable it is in the real world.
Negative peace is absence of violence. So that would be similar to absence of symptoms of a disease, absence of fever, things of that kind. Things that reduce the body and reduce the conviviality, absence of violence. Positive peace is more like the immune system, building a strong body, building strong relations between parties of cooperation and harmony. Example, European Union, positive peace. Well, admirable peace, so peace engineering.
Well, Professor, I'm going to see how we apply that in the real world in a moment. Let me bring in Ambassador de Soto here, and good to have you as well, sir. Now, you've been involved in a number of conflicts situations, and I wonder how much do you think principles of impartiality and self-determination in mediation are actually respected by those trying to broker peace?
Well, impartiality is certainly fundamental for international organizations who are in the business of trying to solve conflicts. And that is usually something that must be adhered to profoundly. Self-determination works and is necessary in the context of doing away with colonial regimes, but you have to be careful of not taking it to the point where you're breaking up established states and into 1,000 pieces. You could have otherwise what happened in the former Yugoslavia replicated on a rather giant scale. So you have to. It's a tricky concept to handle.
Now, Ambassador, considering the experiences you've had across the world and the conflicts you've witnessed and seen, I wonder, is there a common thread that you can see in these conflicts which allows you to formulate a procedure or an approach based on your experiences of other places? Or is it that each conflict has to be approached in a totally new way?
I'd say that there are more differences than commonalities between conflict. I certainly adhere to what Dr. Galtung said a moment ago, identify the underlying causes and address them. But other than that, the sad fact in an era where you have a great transparency and the press is focused on efforts to bring about negotiated end to conflicts, you have too high expectations. And unfortunately, not all conflicts lend themselves to the ministrations of conflict resolvers. Timing is everything.
Well, Professor, you know, it's interesting if we look at a situation, a real-world situation with one where certainly the United States has backed itself into a military and political corner, so to speak. I'm talking, of course, about Afghanistan. And I wonder, with things there deteriorating steadily, in spite of the ambitious efforts of the international community, what impact do you expect from President Obama's suggested troop increase?
Very negative. I think I would agree with the ambassador more than with the general. We don't have to mention the names. But again, I think the basic point is to find the underlying conflict. And to my mind, there are two. There is one bunch of items that have to do with Afghanistan. And then there's another one, which is called the US security and the danger of Afghanistan being a failed state and being, if you will, very hospitable to Al-Qaeda. I think one has to go deeper than that, much deeper. And what to me was very inspiring was the Spanish Prime Minister Zapatero's way of handling what in Spanish is called 11M, the 11th of March 2004, where you had this horrible atrocity committed at the Madrid subway station. Well, he pulled out of Iraq. He went to Rabat to negotiate with the king. He didn't bomb Rabat, as somebody else might have done. He certainly, very basically, recognized illegal immigrants, almost 500,000, provided they have a job, and he organized dialogue of civilization with the Turkish Prime Minister. Right. So there you have four excellent things, picking up four components of what is often called terrorism. He could have added an apology for what Spain did in Morocco in 1925, bombing the sacred city of Jaén. And there was a young general called Francisco Franco who administered that. He could have apologized for that. He could also perhaps have offered his services as mediator, but he was not quite that good at the ETA situation. But I think that was brilliant. Now, if Bush and Blair had done something similar, there would have been a much better situation.
Of course, Afghanistan is a tangle, and I wonder, Ambassador De Soto, if I could ask you about the approach that the international community has taken there. I wonder, considering the way things are going, is it, in your opinion, more advisable for the international community to leave the affairs of Afghanistan to the Afghans and essentially pull out?
Well, the case has not yet been made convincingly, as far as I can tell from what I see in the press, for an actual military increase, improving the situation. To the contrary, what worries me with a large military increased commitment is that the West, by and large, lacks what's known as strategic patience. Political calendars interfere, and certainly this particular military endeavor is not popular in either Europe or the United States, as far as I can tell. So it's not clear that if there is an increase, they will be able to actually sustain it until the goals are achieved, which is many years down the road, as far as I can tell.
Ambassador, let's take a look at a situation that's been going on a long time as well, 6 decades, the Middle East. Now, you're known for your strong views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You've criticized Israel for setting unachievable conditions for talks and the Palestinians for their violence. And you've said that American pressure has pummeled into submission the UN's role as an impartial Middle East negotiator. I know that was meant for just UN ears, but it got out. But I want to put a question that came from a viewer on that issue from New York here in the USA. Gregory Beals wrote in saying, what political conditions are necessary for the UN Security Council to accept a declaration of Palestinian independence? How would such a declaration overcome a possible US veto, and under what conditions would it lead to lasting peace with Israel? Can you see any conditions acceptable to the UN Security Council?
Well, you would have to find the creation of a Palestinian state is part and parcel of an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it holds the key to the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, broadly speaking, and it also affects conflict even going broader than that. The problem is bringing about a solution that creates not just a Palestinian state in the abstract, but rather a viable one that can actually stand up on its own 2 feet and that is not entirely dependent on Israel. And that requires a number of problems being solved. Certainly one of them is a security problem, but another one is the ability of the Palestinians, those that are in Gaza as well as those that are in the West Bank, to be able to have connectivity and to be able to move around freely, to be able, so as to be able to successfully export to the outside world. And a solution also has to be found to the question of Jerusalem, which goes beyond the ability of merely the Palestinians to enter into agreements on. It concerns the entire Muslim world. And there's also the central question of the Palestinian refugees who are languishing already in the third or fourth generation in their hundreds of thousands in neighboring countries.
Right. And on that subject, I was going to ask Professor Galtung exactly this, that the ambassador has listed some of these well-known situations. When the situation seems so intractable as described there, how do you approach it with your view on peace?
You go into the future. You say, I've been mediating there since 1964, hundreds of dialogues. And I agree very, very much with what the ambassador said. I'd just like to add a point. I think the solution is, and you have to almost paint it on the wall, it's a Middle East community. A Middle East community of Israel with the 5 neighboring Arab states, meaning Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, fully recognized according to international law, 194, 242, all that, and Egypt. And the model is, of course, the European community, as it was born in reality 1st of January 1958, accommodating Germany. This could accommodate Israel. But Israel would be a Jewish state, or a state with Jewish characteristics, but it would not realize the more, let us say, extremist Zionist dreams from Nile to the Euphrates, or anything like that. It would not accommodate 13.9 million Jews. It would be a state with Jewish characteristics, a normal country, and its security would be through peace, the same way as we have done it in Europe, successfully. And we didn't do it in Europe by having a treaty between Germany and Luxembourg. And this kind of arrangement between Israel and a Palestinian mini-state with 7.5% of the territory is just a way of feeding the future big conflict.
I want to ask you more about it in a second, Professor, but I'm going to ask you and the ambassador to stand by as we take a very short break now. We have more of our discussion in just a moment. Don't go away.